Talk show. Recorded live.
Hello and welcome to the Virtualization Security Podcast, episode number 92. Today our panelists are Eben Rodriguez, who is an IT industry veteran, now serving as a cloud solutions advisor for CA Technologies. Michael Berman, who hopefully will be joining us later, is an independent consultant and subject matter expert in security and virtualization. And myself, Edward Haletke, a.k.a. TechSciWill in the VMware Communities Forum and just about everywhere else, and author of several books on virtualization, one of which is VMware vSphere and Virtual Infrastructure Security. You can find that on Amazon. Today's topic is kind of open. I was hoping to have a guest on, but they could not make it. So really what I want to talk about is what we found at VMworld, what we expect to happen, some of the things that came out, and one of the several keynotes, and also wanted to cover software-defined data center, software-defined network a little bit. So welcome, everybody. I saw many of you at VMworld, and I'm sure a lot of fun was had, but outside the fun, what struck you as interesting on the show floor, at a talk, at a keynote about virtualization, cloud security?
Just how many security companies were there?
How many were? How many did you count?
I didn't have it. I had about 20 minutes to walk the floor. I was so busy, but I didn't really count how many. But as I was walking through, there were lots.
Well, it was some that were and were not. It was Symantec, Trend, Kaspersky, DeepSet was there, which was rather surprising.
Yeah, all
of those.
Yeah, a lot of those being security products that the IT buyer would be interested in.
Exactly, and it was Bitdefender, a lot of end user computing, or endpoint security companies, I would say.
Yep.
But outside of that, I mean, there was the traditional ones. A4 was there, HighTrust, Catbird, Juniper, with their introspective APIs. Reflex was there as well. Even, who did you see that was there that was different outside the regular set?
Well, I'm going to say one of the things I noticed was that there were security companies there, but what I liked is that all of the big sort of traditional IT companies were doing security as well. Everybody was talking about security, not just the security companies. So that was the thing that impressed me the most.
Which big IT company was talking about security there?
Well, I mean, VMware for one. The thing that I liked was the way Martin Casado was interviewed on theCUBE, that little video show they have there. I think it's called Hangspace. Did any of you guys get to go visit Hangspace? That was a lot of fun.
Yep.
This big giant room split up into different sections. The bloggers were over on one side with the tables where they could plug into a hard line and not have to worry about using the show floor wireless. And then over on the other side, they had this interview section set up with video cameras and speakers and these kind of CNN-type reporters interviewing different people. So Chris Hoff got up there and was talking about software-defined networking. Of course, everyone wanted to know his thoughts. But I was really impressed with Martin Casado's talk and how he really feels that companies need to design their data centers differently. They need to learn from, say, how Facebook and Google and other large companies like eBay design sort of flat, very highly reliable networks where the security gets built in on top of that through software-defined networking. That was the way I took it. And it's something that we've seen happen in the last year or so. And it's really a new way of designing networks that bigger cloud providers are needing to look at. So I was trying to pick up on those sort of forward-looking trends.
Okay, and I do know that theCUBE had two other people on to talk about. I mean, Hoff was on by himself, and then Hema, Hoff, and myself were on. So they actually had 3, maybe 4 sessions on security inside theCUBE, which was rather intriguing. I think that was the most of any VMworld.
Okay.
And we did lightning talks on the other side with the bloggers, and I got up there and talked about large-scale cloud forensics for a bit, but that was about it. That's the only thing I knew from that side.
So that's a good topic.
What about sessions? Anybody go to a session?
Well, I missed the lightning talks. Can you give us maybe 5 minutes, if it's worthwhile, on the podcast about forensics in the cloud? I'd be interested to hear sort of your thoughts on that. I think that's a whole nother...
Welcome, Michael. I think that's a whole nother discussion, but
okay.
The lightning talk was 10 minutes. You can get it online. I believe that John Troyer and those guys stream all the lightning talks online, the V. Brown Bag guys, and it was a really quick discussion of all the rich set of data that's available inside the cloud to make forensics easier.
Yep.
But because it's a rich set of data, it's also making it harder to get without shutting down the cloud. So it was more about those types of things. It's well worth listening to, and there should be a lot more. There was an RSA talk on it with Sam Curry and myself, and there's going to be a few more discussions going forward. There's a lot involved there, and I think if we can definitely talk about it. I have no problems doing that.
Just curious as to the maturity level. I know a lot of companies have, in the enterprise, for example, they have their own forensics infrastructure, set up to, like if it's looking at insider threat, they're going to have capturing technology to capture different taps and data sources, and then they can analyze that and do forensics on it. So they might want to keep that data for 30 days or 60 days, and if there's a problem, they can go back and look and produce.
That's a lower burden of proof. The large-scale forensics that we're talking about is actually for the court of law. It's a higher burden of proof. Mm-hmm. Current warrants issued to cloud providers today by the law enforcement are antiquated and old. And what happens is the law enforcement goes in, they say, I would need that machine, that machine, that machine, that machine. Or they could say, I need all machines backed by this IP or this IP range. And they'll just
and then they say, give me the array.
Exactly. They haul
hand
out
over the
hardware, and
sand.
if you argue with them, they just say, get me a bigger truck.
So I guess my concern is, I was curious where we are with that, because as cloud providers need to give up data or give up information on their customers, for example.
It's different. And as I said, it makes no difference. Today, law enforcement's warrants are written in such a way that does not permit them to get just one tenant. They will grab they will grab everything. If the IP range is wide enough, they could shut down Amazon, for example. Literally, they'll go in and grab everything out of the data center. They've already done that to several clouds, and then they'll do their best to get back the hardware that they don't need or the data they don't need, but they're not after the data. They're after the physical footprint and plant. And until that changes, those warrants change, it's never going to change. That's the starting point, and it hasn't moved at all as far as I can see. But backing that, there's actually a problem with forensics in the cloud, and you hit on part of it, and that is that how do I get this data? How long do I store it? Could let's say my disk image I want to get to inspect turn into a petabyte of storage that I now need to store somewhere? How do I get it while the cloud is still running? How can I only get one tenant's data? And several clouds are built to do that today using today's technology. They'll allow you to get a single tenant or to get, for example, a dump of all the network traffic using things like NetWitness and others, or they'll allow you to get a copy of a virtual disk using NCASE and various other tools of that nature. And those are perfectly acceptable in the court of law. They've been proven. The problem is that when you go to scales that take longer than 2 to 7 years to actually even investigate, and I'm talking petabyte scales, then we have a problem. We can't get to the data. We can't analyze the data fast enough to find out if we actually even have anything related to the court case at hand. And that takes time.
I'm wondering if instead of handing everything over, if the cloud providers wouldn't partner more with law enforcement to give them what they need in the cloud environment. Yeah, so that
you need to have people on your staff that have been blessed by the forensics community. They have to have the right credentials. Your lab has to be a forensics lab that's been blessed by law enforcement. And generally when law enforcement goes to a cloud or an organization, anything anybody else has done is basically not acceptable because they're not blessed, they don't have the credentials. Michael, you've done stuff with forensics. What's your thoughts on that?
Well, many. I'm going to say, in some ways it's not as tough a picture as you're painting. So if I can here, and I may have missed some of the points you made, but for instance, your point about how warrants are written. So a warrant is always going to be written, and I don't see this changing for any reason, such that if they feel they need to, law enforcement can take the machines, unplug them, and walk out the door with them. Now, that doesn't mean they want to do that.
No, of course I don't.
But they're going to have the warrant written that way because sometimes that's what they have to do, because sometimes the provider is not cooperative, or the provider doesn't have the technology to meet the needs of the warrant in any other way. But if you have the technology, the law enforcement doesn't want to walk out with the RAID, the drive array, the SAN. And I'm sorry, you can't take a big EMC array out of a data center, even in a truck. Right? Okay, it just can't be done.
We build them that way.
Yeah. So the issue there is, some of the other things you've said, Ed. So let's just address personnel. So, most frameworks today strongly suggest or even require that you have people on your staff who are tasked with being the interface to law enforcement when and if.
Exactly.
And that person has to go to the right conferences. That person has to be, a CISP or a CISA or a certified forensic. I forget the SAN cert for forensics. But there's a whole bunch of certs, any one of which or combination thereof will do. You just have to be prepared to establish your bona fides as an expert witness should you be called upon to testify in court. And having done this more than once, I'll say it's very intimidating the first time, and then after you've done it a few times, you realize, I would say to you, everybody on this podcast could easily qualify for expert status, with just a little bit of training and then some practice with an attorney before that first time you're in court. But there is that challenge, and you do need a cert or two to back up your expertise and some experience, and you have to be someone who's used to doing this. But then you've got that, and then you need the technology. So, Mike Foley knows this technology better than I, but if you've got the technology in the data center for cloning LUNs, cloning machines, right, and you're willing to testify, right, that process you followed is an exact forensic copy, right?
That's
at
difficult.
the layer.
Has not been proven yet.
No. I'm sorry. I've worked with clones of VMs in court. It's fine. You might get it.
But I'm not talking about workstation VMs, and I'm not talking about 10 or 20 of them. I'm talking about hundreds of them.
But Ed, that's what I'm talking
duplication
about.
still hasn't been proven. There's a lot of things that that have been accepted in the court of law. I agree with you. But from the forensics perspective, we can say, yes, that's a copy, but it's not.
Well, a question, you guys. As you talk back and forth, it's important for me to understand, who's your audience? Are you speaking to an enterprise considering putting their application in the cloud, or are you speaking to a cloud provider trying to earn those customers that want to move to the cloud? Are you providers or the users?
Forensics has nothing to do with either, really.
Well, the cloud provider has a problem. If the cloud provider cannot cooperate with law enforcement, then
they have a real problem.
Then they could get put out of business. So there are laws right? If you're a carrier, and I suspect all cloud providers qualify as carriers, you have to be able to comply with a subpoena, a warrant. And if you can't comply with it, then they might cart the big truck up to your data center.
And they have done that. I mean, that's just proof has already been done. That's been done. But the other sides have also been done as well. Now, forensics for malware, forensics for non-court of law, it's a lower burden of proof, and it has a wildly different way of doing analysis. It can be a little looser. But when you start talking about a court of law, the burden of proof is actually fairly high. And the thing is, and Michael's right, they'll say, oh, we got experts that say this is perfectly right, that's an exact copy. It's actually an exact duplicate and so forth. But they'll also have the defense, or the alternative will have other experts that say the exact opposite. That's the problem today. But the real problem is, in my opinion, is that even though I may get all that data, we're talking petabyte scale data from a cloud. It is not a small amount of data, and that's hard to go through today. You have to find the ones that meet the needs the most, not everything. It gets into the concept of best evidence.
Well, here's the
best we could get.
Well, here's the thing. So let's say, in the court of law, if you're prosecuting in criminal is the highest bar, right? So if you're prosecuting in criminal court, and you've gone through petabytes of data or whatever you've done, and you have found evidence of the crime, what you have to be able to document and testify to is you basically have to have the instructions so that another qualified expert who did exactly what you did would end up with the same result.
Exactly.
And you have to be able to show, and this is where chain of custody comes in. And this is where, I think to Ed's point, a smart defense attorney can try to poke holes in what you're doing. You have to be able to establish that the evidence you gathered with over the course of gathering it has not been tampered with, right? Has not been messed with. And whether it's the OJ trial or not, that often is the ultimate question.
Absolutely.
Because, yeah.
So chain of custody outside of it in a physical world is extremely easy. Chain of custody in a virtual world is slightly harder. It can be done.
Well, that's why I brought up the OJ trial. They blew chain of custody in the physical world.
Yeah.
Right?
Yep, absolutely. So there's all sorts of things that can happen there. Anyways, that was just, as I said, a quick talk just about what information is available. You can go from 100 gigabytes of data to 100 terabytes of data in no time. And you can go even past that to, depending on how big the scale of the tenant is, it can go even bigger than that. Think about a scale of the New York Stock Exchange Community Cloud, which has petabytes of data that is being accessed by multiple tenants. That data itself becomes part of a tenant for however long they're using it, and that could be tracked back and used as part of a court of law. So I have to go through a petabyte of data. How I do that, that's a big question right now. The existing tools try to get close, but I think we need something that's far beyond the existing tools. It means it's effectively a big data problem. But outside of that, Michael, what did you see at the show at all? Did you get out of the booth at all?
Who, me?
Michael Berman.
Oh.
Michael Foley, you said you only had 20 minutes on this show floor.
Yeah, I was in a bunch of sessions, I think. Well, go ahead, Michael Berman. I'll let you go ahead and...
Yeah, because mine's going to be short. I went to Gargi's session. I heard about some session where they talked about something called software-defined security. I have no idea what that is.
vShield.
Yeah. And I think I spent 40 hours on the floor actually. So
oh my God.
That was my week. Go ahead, Mike Foley. You probably have something more interesting to talk about.
So yeah, what happened? I didn't go to a single session because I was talking to people on the show floor and actually vendors, a lot of vendors.
Yeah, I went to a number of sessions, some not so memorable, and I had a chat with John Troyer about it afterwards. I think the number of PowerPoint-led sessions was way too high, meaning marketecture or just marketing-ish feels to them. But I did go to one that was absolutely awesome, and that was the Building Your Cloud, the U.S. government's first secure hybrid community cloud. And that was...
say that again slowly. Secure hybrid
community cloud. I think we've hit every buzzword.
Yeah.
Right.
It's both public and private. It's community, and it's secure.
And it's government.
And it's hybrid. Oh, and it's government. I love it.
It was.
Wait, is it free?
only if the toys you play with are nuclear weapons. It was led by Anil Carmel, who used to run the Los Alamos National Lab cloud that they had out in the lab. It was one of the first clouds that passed an audit, being able to run multiple security levels on one set of infrastructure. That's about the most that they'll tell you. And he is now the CTO of the NNSA, which is nuclear something, part of the Department of Energy. And they're using things like Socialcast. They're using things like Horizon. They're big into using SAML.
I've heard of Horizon before, but I wonder if it's the same thing I'm thinking of. Can you tell me? I know what SAML is.
Yeah, so Horizon's VMware's
thing
where you log into a portal, you click on an icon, it automatically logs you into your website.
So it's more of an authentication tool.
Yeah.
So
you log in with your CAC card, and then you can go click on something and be into like your time management thing or whatever.
So you're saying this is a government-based cloud, but it's using VMware technology.
Oh yeah.
Interesting. Because you think of government, a lot of times you think of NASA and Rackspace and open source, but not this one, huh?
No, not at all. It's really interesting. What I found really cool about the whole thing, I had met Anil before, so that's why I was very interested in going to see a session. What I found really interesting from a personal standpoint was it was like he stole my current PowerPoint deck and just picked up all of the little bits and pieces that I talk to customers about and put them into his session. I think it's really more of a great minds think alike thing. But
you do know he was at the New England VMUG watching.
Yeah.
He was in the back in the dark suit, hidden behind everything. He blended in.
Yeah, he wore the suit that made him disappear.
Yeah, one we can't talk about.
Yes.
Mike, there's convergent ideas, great minds think alike, and then there's also,
common sense.
Imitation, and also imitation is the sincerest form of flattery.
Right.
So was this a follow-on to what they did a few years ago? Or an improvement upon what they did a few years ago?
I think a few years ago he discussed what he did at Los Alamos.
Yes.
Now he's moved up.
But is this more of a taking what they did at Los Alamos and just...
I think so.
Okay.
So
Not
it's
that they can tell us much of what they did at Los Alamos.
Yeah, it's the National Nuclear Security Administration.
Cool.
Yeah, it's big time, right?
Yep.
And he is the CTO for that organization, which falls under the Department of Energy. So serious security chops, right? Or that are needed.
But it boils down to is that cloud still boils down to trusted security. The guys running it have the clearances and the
Sure.
certifications that says, yes, I can see all that data.
Yeah, and one of the things that he mentioned that is like the last slide on my deck is that whole thing around, can we solve this problem technically? Well, given the right money and the right people who want to do it, absolutely. Tech is easy. It's the business and people and process that are really hard to fix.
Exactly.
And he went into security needs to be baked into the design, need analytics to help in decision making. And I found out, which was really neat from an RSA standpoint, that they're using RSA Archer, and they've written a whole bunch of custom stuff to dump stuff into Archer so that they know where they are from a total business standpoint around compliance. So it was a pretty neat conversation. It was probably the best session I went to.
What about the other ones you went to?
Yeah, I'd have to look at my schedule to figure out which ones I went to. There were some that I just kind of went, and got up and walked out. They weren't nearly as interesting as I thought they would be. And others were more of a personal interest around, I went to Scott Lowe and Forbes Guthrie's design session. I went to one of, I think, either Frank and Duncan's sessions, one of the ones that you mentioned a few minutes ago, a Gargi session around software-defined security. The panel session that Jerry Bro from VMware and formerly RSA hosted, and that Dennis Moreau from RSA was on. That was an interesting session.
Dennis you got an interesting group of people there with Dennis.
Yeah. Dennis is incredibly bright. Scary.
It was four things. It was 1759, 1840, 2850, and 3460. Those are the numbers for anybody listening that actually got their PDFs out pretty early.
Yeah.
So the ones that were well liked, VMworld got
the content.
The content out very, very well. And these were four that came out on Socialcast. If you were on Socialcast at VMworld or off, that had it, software-defined networking and security, which is what you were talking about. Yeah.
And the session number for building your cloud is INF-SEC, SEC 2031, for those listening at home or in your car.
Did that one come out yet?
I don't know. I haven't even had a chance. That's one of the things about the whole Socialcast thing. I couldn't keep up with the flow of everything. That adding yet another social media thing to this whole mix was like, I'll get to it later.
Yeah, I was going from Twitter to Socialcast to Mail to Twitter. So it was nuts. I actually spent most of my time in Twitter and Mail anyways. So.
Right. I mean, you could literally go to VMworld and just sit in the hang space and do Twitter all day long and Socialcast all day long.
That was
and
me.
never miss a beat. You would be up on everything.
Right.
I'm like, why did I buy a full conference pass? What am I doing sitting here in hang space? But it was pretty good.
Yeah, exactly.
So what else? I mean,
one thing I
want to talk about is software-defined security. I think that is an oxymoronic term. I really do.
I think it's just taking the software-defined meme.
That sounds like fighting words. Say it again.
Well, let me explain why I think the term software-defined security should be outlawed.
Okay.
And that is because the software-defined data center or the software-defined network should have security as an intrinsic part of them from the beginning. Software-defined security sounds like a bolt-on.
Him and Han over here.
Okay, that may be true, but now you're looking for unicorns and it
ends up being that it shouldn't be used at all. It should just be either software-defined data center or software-defined network. We just pick the two there and build security into the architectures from the very beginning.
The software-defined is last year's cloud, is the year before's virtualization. That's all.
Yeah.
Yeah,
it's just a name.
Hold on, you guys.
Software-defined means is a lot different to me. And it wasn't. I did not see it at the show, and I did not see it from a security perspective. I did not see it from a data center perspective. Software-defined to me is basically someone going out and saying, I got a product that I need to ship 1 million units of it in 6 months. I plan on selling 1 million of those. Make me a data center to do that. That's what I mean by software-defined. It comes from a natural language, and it's basically, Siri, I need to ship this. I need to do this. How do I do it?
Hold on.
Siri says, here you go. Here's your virtual data center. It has everything you do. So forth, so forth, and so forth.
Now let's step back for a second.
Yeah.
Even did you want to go?
You go first, Mike. I mean, I want to hear what you have to say on this because, I mean, there's definitely a lot going on here that is. It's not as simple as it seems on the surface.
No, it certainly isn't. And then, so let's just agree on the marketing the marketing neologism that we're in. So,
can you agree on the software-defined marketing?
Well, let's just be clear, okay? So, we at Capert has certainly evolved many different terms. We were calling what we do virtualization security for a long time. You could turn the words around and call it security virtualization. There's currently a tagline, real security for the virtual world. There's virtualization threat management. But then, gosh darn it, 8 or 9 months ago, VMware started talking about software-defined data center, software-defined this, software-defined that, right? And it became very clear that, one of the big movers in marketing and in the market in general wasn't calling it virtualization anymore. And so that's a big deal from the marketing point of view.
They're not calling what virtualization anymore?
Well, they're calling it the software-defined data center.
I mean, that's a future vision, right?
Exactly.
It's the reality today.
With cloud
part
and
reality,
automation
part
and
vision.
whatnot.
Part reality, part vision. So, but that's a big deal. So from a marketing point of view, I think you have to give marketing people a little room and go, especially when smaller companies, when the big guy says it's software defined, the little guys have to follow, or it sounds like you're not singing the same song.
Yeah, really, this is not a technical discussion. Michael's right. This is a marketing discussion. This is about VMware setting the talking points for the next 6 to 12 months, and by creating this meme of software-defined X, they get to define what software-defined X is, or start the whole conversation. It's cloud, it's virtualization, it's VAX clusters and VT100s.
Well, actually, I don't think so.
Wait a second.
I think it's a vision. I think
we can define certain terms and have agreement on what these terms mean. And you know how NIST has come up with the definition of cloud, and we all sort of try to say, in any PowerPoint you see nowadays, during this talk, I will use the NIST definition of cloud terms, right? We don't really have that yet for software-defined networking or data centers, and that's coming from the vendors. But as it becomes more and more accepted, then I can see, some official Wikipedia definition becoming accepted. Right now, we're still trying to figure out what it all means, right?
I can tell you right now what software-defined security or security virtualization means. You want to hear it?
Sure.
You ready?
That's going to be your opinion, right?
Well, we all know what opinions are like.
Of course, it's just my opinion, but let me for a moment pretend that I'm a leader in this field. But yes, it's my opinion.
Okay, when you go update Wikipedia.
Yeah, number one. Well, I could go write a Wikipedia entry right now. What does that mean? Anyway, number one, independence from security hardware. Number two, faithful reproduction.
What's this the definition of? Software-defined what?
This is software-defined security, or security virtualization if you prefer.
Okay.
Right. Independence from security hardware. That's number one. Number two is faithful reproduction of the physical network security model in the virtual space, including security for both physical and virtual workloads. 3, follow the operational model of compute virtualization.
Reading this off of somewhere?
Yeah, of course I'm reading this off of stuff. This is my work, guys. This is what I'm spending 6 years doing.
You got to share this with us.
4, compatible with any hypervisor platform. 5.
Oh, wow. Any?
Any. Well, that's ideal.
That's broad. Okay.
Got to be broad. If it's only,
Visionary.
Well, look, it's got to be, right now it's obvious. VMware.
No, I
Red
disagree
Hat,
100%.
Red Hat Hyper-V, right? I mean, But anyway,
no, I don't
with any
even think
hypervisor
cloud means virtualized, so I don't even, no.
Yeah, wait till I get to the last part, and then I can explain some of these other things. 5, logical isolation of virtualized workloads, audit and security for control plane elements. Subtle but important, that last part. 6, cloud performance and scale. And 7, open programmatic security provisioning and control. So if you do this right, other hypervisor platforms just have to build to your API, and your stuff works on that platform. So think syslog Ceph, think security content automation protocol, think a few things that no one has defined yet, but that's the vision.
Antivirus, IDP, authentication.
Yep. Well, XACML for XACML. I would claim that authentication is XACML. So there's a lot of work going on, right? And that's the direction where you're going to basically have, if a security vendor, a security virtualization vendor builds to a certain API, it'll just work on the platforms because the platforms support that API. Sort of like we hoped OVF would be, right? And almost is. And then, a couple of the subtle points, right, is that if all you do is secure virtual workloads, your customers still have a problem and have to run physical defined security along with the software defined security. So that's not wonderful.
Which will probably end up being a perimeter solution.
Which will probably, yeah. But does it, but I claim you can protect everything with software defined. Again, that's vision. The follow the operational model of compute virtualization. What I mean by that is that the deployment of security, and this is to what Ed was saying just a minute ago, which was it should just be built right in. But if this is done right,
I said
whether it's and it's part of vCloud Director. When you add an ESX host, automatically deploys whatever the security dingus is that has to be on every ESX host, right? But it's a piece of software.
But doesn't really do it today.
No.
I just got to come right out and say this. I don't think a VMware-centric solution could possibly be software-defined anything.
That's why number 4 is
without considering a data center that has Polaris, Microsoft, Windows. All physical boxes need to be considered as bare metal. So it needs to be able to support that.
That's right. That's
why I think you're going to have different levels of what software-defined anything means, but the software
it's a matter of
data center doesn't necessarily mean virtualized.
Well,
I think that using the word software-defined has started with the OpenFlow team, right? The different groups, whether it's Big Switch, Metakura, Nicira, etc.
OpenFlow and Nicira, I think they said software-defined networking.
Right, and that's a play on cloud. These were technologies that were sort of becoming more and more relevant with cloud solutions. And cloud, again, does not mean 100% virtualized. It means automated and many other practices that cloud, elastic, on-demand, multi-tenant, all these other things, right? So software-defined networking, obviously, is a technology that is coming around and becoming very popular. VMware is banking a lot on this, and other vendors are putting money into it, like Cisco and others. So I think a software-defined security solution is going to be leveraging on top of software-defined networking. And that could be open flow physical switches, maybe from HP or Arista, all these other vendors, or it could be if you're building a Nicira-based data center, it could be on Ubuntu KVM and hopefully VMware down the road and other vendors. Microsoft might be a player in these virtual networks. They're going to integrate with the distributed switch. There's a great future, but I don't think that exists today. So we need to start helping define what it should look like.
Yeah, I mean, I'll say with no modesty whatsoever, Capert is the closest to having any of this. But that being said, there's a lot more work to be done. I mean, remember what you said and what I said. We both said the same things. It's got to include physical. It's got to be able to protect bare metal. It's got to be compatible with any hypervisor platform. But something subtle that I want to add here, because it's not enough to simply work on software-defined networks. You have to, again, assuming we're dealing with hypervisors, you've got to plug into the control plane for the hypervisor administration, hypervisor configuration, and management. So it's a combination, I claim, of plugging into the software-defined networking elements, but really plugging into layer one of the software-defined data center, which is the hypervisor platform itself.
And we're going to, I agree with you on that. We're close to it on some cases. I think today we have an existing version of software-defined something. Whether it's data center or just networking, that's fine. But my whole take is that the security aspects of anything that's software-defined has to be part of those initial architectures. Bolting it on
I agree.
The back never works.
I agree 100%.
Treating it as something separate, in my mind, is basically an architectural nightmare waiting to happen. Because what happens if you don't have it baked into the architecture, for example, if when I deployed a vCloud tenant and it did not have a firewall already, an edge firewall part of that, which it is part of it, then we would have a nightmare waiting to happen when it comes to clouds. Because VMware went ahead and said, okay, vCloud, we're going to have you the option of doing this, but it is the default to deploy a new version of an edge firewall. Hey, everybody's happy with that, and they get some level of baked-in, built-in protection. And
again, you're talking about existing technologies, and I don't think the existing technology is able to provide software-defined security today. We can debate that. But
I think that existing technologies are the basis for software-defined data centers in software-defined network. There's a lot more to go. I did not hear a vision of where that's going, but I have my own. Well,
I don't want to hear it just from VMware. I know we're talking about VMworld, but
I think this is a vision that is if you have the right visions, regardless of sector.
Let's take a snapshot of the software-defined networking landscape as it exists today. Google, one of the largest infrastructure technology companies in the world today, is using 100% software-defined networking, open flow based, within their global network, right? You guys have all seen the little PowerPoint and presentation they did at the OpenStack conference. So they are putting QoS on their network. They have security built in everywhere, and when they deploy new networks or new data centers, it gets this infrastructure put in place, and it has all these properties built into it. And I believe that's a version, Google's version of software-defined data center with software-defined networking, and security is definitely a part of that. So how can the industry leverage that sort of architecture for an enterprise? A company is building out a new data center, whether it's one of our customers, somewhere, a government maybe. How can they build a software-defined network? They're probably going to use OpenFlow sort of technology. If they do 100% VMware, then sure, it could be a VMware distributed switch or whatever VMware's software-defined network is. But it has to all be automated, and then security, whether it's firewalls and all the other security stack, needs to be automatically built into every component.
One answer to that. Everybody needs, before you even buy anything for that new data center, wherever it's going to be, the architecture has to have security and networking and everything as part of it from the get-go. The right people need to be at that architectural meeting. You cannot just do it as an island. The other teams have to be involved. The architecture requires it. Otherwise, you will be bolting things on, and it will fail.
Agreed.
So if the architecture is not there to start with, and by the way, Google doesn't release its architectures, so we don't know that.
Suggesting we copy it. I'm just saying it's been done.
Well, it's been done, but again, they spent a lot of time on it, and they looked at it as an architecture. They did not say it's this, or this.
Yeah, and I would
here.
also say it's not multi-tenant and probably wouldn't be considered officially cloud.
No, it's multi-tenant.
It's an internal enterprise architecture, right? It's their personal network.
Google, well, I'm talking about when they...
I guess what I'm saying, they have one security operations center monitoring the security that's going on in their network worldwide, right? So it might not scale for what we need a cloud provider, AT&T, Verizon, Rackspace, et cetera, doing this software-defined security, might not scale to hundreds of customers that they have. They can't leverage the same model.
It's an architecture that includes security. It's not software-defined security. It's an architecture that includes security from the beginning, from architecture point perspective. That's where it needs to be. That's why my take on this is that they are not separate. I'd rather not bolt it on at the end.
So what security components?
So that works.
Let's get what security components could be integrated into a software-defined network or software-defined data center? I'm thinking firewalls for one, IDSs, IPSs, maybe.
I think, and Michael,
I would go off. I would go off the top 5 of SANs as a place to start too. So what
again?
Michael, I missed you. What you say? The top 5 what?
Oh, the SANS top 5 or the Australian guys top 4 or whatever.
Oh, right.
But even what you're saying was right, and then there's like, obviously there's auditing's got to be in here, but there's configuration checking, defect vulnerability checking, and then you said firewall, IDS, IPS.
So let me ask you, network vulnerability assessments, is that one of them?
It is, but you don't necessarily have to do it over the network, but yes.
The wire sort of passively.
So let's think about what's involved with doing this. So if we're going to do a security architecture, and we're going to talk about a hybrid cloud or a software-defined data center security, a secure software-defined data center, let's just say that. You ultimately have to have defense in depth at all layers. You also have to have the ability to fail safely instead of fail closed. In other words, if firewall A fails, how do you get back in so you can reroute everything to go through firewall B? Either an active passive or even what happens if you have a large organization like a cloud where I have multiple data centers, how can I fail everything that's going towards data center A to data center B when it gets flooded? Those things we have to think about right from the beginning. So that's the whole question of availability. But when I move things, the security controls also must move. And that's the key. And that means a defense in depth. So you got defense in depth at all layers. If we just say, oh, we need an IDS, IPS, we need a WAF, we need this, we need that. No, I think it really needs to be part of what you're trying to serve up. An IDS, IPS may not be necessary or may just be useless in your case. You may just want a top layer to get rid of DOS or something like that.
Well, all right, I would argue with that a little bit, but I'm not
a big fan of rules-based monitoring, except at the edges. And even then, I'm not a real big fan of them, anyways.
Intrusion detection is not. I wasn't going to say that intrusion detection is synonymous with rule-based monitoring, but what I was going to say is what you really want is your workload to come along with the definition of the security required for the workload.
Absolutely.
And then...
that's one of the things that software-defined whatever it would include a policy sort of metadata that goes along with the whatevers, whether software, networking, security, et cetera.
It doesn't work that way because the objects themselves, let's say our lowest form of object happens to be the VM, a virtual machine, or an application.
Well, it should be more app-based.
But they don't necessarily have a security context that moves with them.
Well,
and that's one of the things that's missing in order for things to be software defined is that policy store needs to be configured and built in order to have something that's software defined.
I would agree with you, but we don't have it yet.
And that's what I was going to say. That's one of the things that that even SCAP, Security Content Automation Protocol, has not defined a policy language. But if you let's just pretend you had a policy language. Obviously, security vendors may have these things internally. They may be proprietary. They may just be embodied in code. But these things exist. And then ideally, you'd have one where you could communicate that. You could stuff it into as variables in a. I'm going to misspeak here. Ed, correct me if I say it wrong. As variables in the VMX file. Right?
Yeah, we could do that, but they get stripped out when you start using OVS. Strips out
right, but there's a section in the OVF where you could have this. So there's a very basic breakdown. So there's actually a section in the OVF where you could stick security policy, but when you convert to VMX, you lose it. So that was very irritating when I discovered that.
And if you stick security context into the VMX before it becomes an OVF, as soon as it's been made an OVF, they get stripped out as well because they're unknown entities.
Yeah. So in that particular case, what you really need is signed metadata that you can apply to any object, not just a VMX file or a VM, but you need to be able to do that with networks and all sorts of other objects, and that all has to be done at the infrastructure level, and only then can you start to really apply the policies in a verifiable method.
Yep.
I'm not sure it needs to be done at the infrastructure level. I think it needs to be done.
It has to be done in such a way that it doesn't interfere with the way VMware. I'm just saying VMware here for the purposes of discussion. It needs to be done in such a way that those things can be obeyed by the hypervisor.
Yeah, if you want to build up root of trust,
right,
you've got to start at layer one. I agree with Mike completely. It's got to start at the infrastructure layer.
I don't think it needs to be at the hypervisor. I agree that the hypervisor needs to be able to interpret it. But I think if we're talking virtual machines, it has to be at the virtual machine.
Well, no, I think we're splitting hairs. I think what Mike and I
Actually, I'm not really splitting a hair here. I think it's a very distinct difference.
Well, let me speak for myself, and then Mike can correct me. What I was going to say, Ed, is let's say your virtual machine is the object. That's fine. But it's really helpful, if not mandatory, and I would say mandatory, that the hypervisor participates in, or vCenter, if we're talking about vSphere, whatever your management control plane, has to be involved in this. And the security, and Ed, you said this, it's got to be built in. In order for security to be built in, it's got to be able to, in fact, insert itself in such a way that it is monitoring hypervisors, it's monitoring vCenter, to just be VMware specific, but the equivalent on other hypervisors. Otherwise, you're spoofable, is how I would put it, right? You don't have that chain of trust from the below the VM. Therefore, you're vulnerable to vCenter being compromised, which is your biggest, attack surface in the infrastructure layer, to my mind. And so you've got to have that extension to the infrastructure, where the hypervisor is looking at some of that metadata that Mike mentioned, and turning on or enabling the security demanded by that metadata, even if that's just, a signature check, right, to make sure that the security software hasn't been compromised before it's loaded up and running to protect the VM.
Yep.
No, I agree with you there. Absolutely. But what I'm saying is that while the hypervisor and all hypervisors need to be able to interpret it, or if they can't,
they need to enforce it.
They got to interpret the security context and enforce it. However, the big key thing is that the security context, because they don't understand what that new policy item is, should not ignore it and shouldn't rip it out. It should say,
right.
Sorry, I can't boot. I don't know what that security context is.
Yeah.
It should be yet another question that says, don't understand security context. Is this okay to boot?
Fail open, fail close.
Or fail safely, where I have already set a policy ahead of time saying, if I see a bunch of these that come up this way, for this particular hypervisor, I'm going to allow them. For this particular hypervisor, I'm not.
And even to that point, you can then start to apply orchestration rules around it. So not only are you enforcing policies, but you're doing things with those policies via orchestration rules, so that if something comes up, it isn't verified. It now gets moved onto a closed network where it can't do any harm while it's up.
Until it's verified,
and then that whole incident is fed into a GRC solution, which means now someone owns it and it's tracked and monitored and applied to policy and everything else. That's software-defined data center from a security standpoint.
I would agree.
Oh, we just solved the world's problems here today. Now it's just a simple matter of programming.
and we have 3 minutes to finish. So, any last-minute thoughts about takes from VMworld? Has anybody?
Well, I'll say that as much as I sort of am down on some of the technology, and I think there's a lot of improvement needed, we're definitely ahead of the game here, and the ability to call these things out and say, this is what we need, is really exciting for me, and I'm just watching the other vendors to try to play catch-up with VMware right now, because they are definitely, challenging all of the big guns in the industry with this Nicira acquisition, and the whole move towards software-defined data centers, I believe, will hinge on the ability to deliver software-defined networks. And now that they own that technology, integrating that into vSphere, which is the most popular infrastructure hypervisor out there, most networks are built on that, is very exciting. And I'm looking to see where Microsoft specifically might possibly integrate with this.
Oh yeah, especially with their updated file systems.
Well,
Updated file systems. I've heard that Open Virtual Switch is built into Windows 8. I want to see how that works.
It actually has the Nicira pieces in it, by the way.
Yeah, that's what I heard.
Wow. So I'm excited to see some new architectures come out of this.
But it's not built in. You have to select it. But once you do, you'll get all the open flow capability of Nicira.
Sounds too good to be true, Ed.
Well, it does, but until that's a different.
Don't worry, it won't work until version 2.
Well, no, the other thing,
it's a patch, right?
Historically, they've taken open stuff and then they tweak it into something proprietary. So, or at least one-off, that it's not the same as and everybody does this to an extent, right? But Microsoft hasn't been as diligent. Again, because of their market position, they haven't had to be, about being true to, the POSIX standard or the open flow standard or whatever, pick your standard. But we'll see.
So, all right, good. What about anything else? I mean, there's one thing I saw on the show floor that I thought was kind of cool, and that was Antigua, where they can actually manage all your agents that you would install inside of any virtual or physical host. And from a security perspective, that is very, very, very interesting. So that was one thing that I took out of it that was rather cool and interesting on the show floor. It was also quite a lot that was interesting and cool on the show floor.
Yep.
So, Michael, Michael Foley, you got to talk now. What's your?
Yeah, I think for me, one of the things that I enjoyed at VMworld was going over and talking with the VMware Orchestrator folks and telling them about the session that I had submitted yet got declined for the use of VMware Orchestrator and RSA Envision, or any SIM for that matter, used in concert, and they really liked that session, and they were bummed that it didn't get picked. And hearing that from the VMware Orchestrator folks, I really enjoyed.
Okay. And well, hopefully next time we can have that session.
Yeah, I certainly hope so, because I really think there is a serious place going forward, especially as more and more stuff becomes software defined, that orchestration tools are going to be really needed to ensure that people don't do stupid things or minimize the amount of stupid things that get done.
Well, you have to amplify what people can do and do things at machine speed.
Yep.
But then there's another risk, which is orchestration feedback, orchestration overload. There's new kinds of risks that orchestration introduces, so we have to be watchful there.
Yeah, and in a nutshell, the presentation I was going to come up with was, as the orchestration rule fires, a log gets sent to your SIM solution, the corresponding task gets completed on vCenter, that log gets sent to the SIM solution, and those two correlate because the orchestration portion is a vetted workflow.
Well,
and then when stuff happens outside of that, those things get flagged as something that needs to be looked at.
But I could also see something like using VMware Orchestrator or any type of orchestration software even at the launch of a VM. We just talked about security context should move with the VM. If we have security context inside of the config file for whichever VM we're using, maybe during launch we push the button that says power that up. Maybe we can use an orchestration tool today to do the exact same thing that we're looking for.
Quite possibly. There's a lot more integration of VMware Orchestrator into vCenter in the latest version of VMware.
Exactly.
Yep.
Or you could write a script that turns it on. There's a whole bunch of things you can do.
Yeah, the possibilities for the use of IT tools to provide better security and then henceforth better measurement of security, it's going to be a really exciting area over the course of the next 2 or 3 years.
I would agree. Absolutely would agree.
Yep.
Well, gentlemen, that is the end of our hour. Thank you very much. Michael, best wishes on wherever you're going.
Thank you.
And even always interesting conversation. Mike Foley, thank you again for your comments. As always, this is Tex I Will, and this is the end of the Virtualization Security Podcast, episode number 92.